Gregus Jr. Martin, last time he was with us, did a wonderful presentation on snowy owls and raptors. And tonight he's going to tell us about spending a couple of weeks camping with 27 polar bears on a remote part of Hudson Bay. And Martin is the youngest member of the Gregus Creative Group. His whole family seems to be incredibly artistic. And Martin will do just about anything legal and not threatening to wildlife to get really good pictures. He'll crawl around in the mud, he uses hides, he uses remote cameras, whatever he thinks is going to get him that picture that will actually give his wildlife a life. And his article on this experience with the 27 polar bears on Hudson Bay actually was published in Canadian Geographic. Now, the link that's shown on the newsletter is not correct. I did send out a corrected link to everybody after I sent out the poster for this presentation. I can send it out again if anybody needs it. And it is on our website, the correct link. cangeo.ca does not work. It worked when I got it. When I sent it out, I tried it after I sent the email, and I got some awful bunch of garbage. And some people found that their antivirus program blocked it. So I don't know what happened there, but there's a good link. If anybody needs it, I will send it out again. So I think I'll just turn this over to Martin and let him tell you about his experience camping with polar bears.
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces from last time. Glad I get to, I mean, it was such an amazing experience. I'm glad I finally get to share it with more people. I mean, to start things off, I would like to show you a video, which was filmed I was there for a month. So it was filmed during the month while I was up in the Arctic, mostly through the use of drones. I will show you the video and then I'll get into some of the footage you will see, as well as some pictures. So if you give me a moment here, I will play this for you.
There's three of us on the screen.
Can you guys see it?
I can see the fish, but there's three participants.
Yep.
Shown up.
There's three boxes blocking the screen.
Belugas.
Blocking the screen. How do I get rid of me?
You need to adjust your participant logo.
Wait. Which one's
Change
that?
it so that only the speaker is
A
on the
month
phone.
with 27 polar bears. He's quite young. It's quite an experience, wouldn't it?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we've lost Martin.
I'm still here.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah, can you see the video?
You can see the video. It's in sort of slow-mo and no music now.
Oh, it might be,
Well, it's okay now. But you might want to give it some commentary.
yeah, I was gonna let you guys watch this one, then I have a bunch of pictures to show you with commentary. So, but I can pause it here and.
No, it's beautiful, Martin.
Yeah, I'll pause it there. So, yeah, as you see there, most of the shot actually while we were camped on this island was done through the use of drones. I'll just stop this one here. I'll bring up the pictures and then I can come back to that one later. Just give me 1 second here. Okay. There we go. Everyone seeing this okay?
Looks great.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like to introduce actually the polar bears of the Arctic. I mean, you saw a lot of them in that video. So the backstory here, all of our footage was filmed on the Hudson Bay, and the Hudson Bay is unique to polar bears in the sense that unlike in Svalbard or other parts of the Arctic, the polar bears have a huge range of land that they can sort of go to once all the ice melts. And in other parts of the Arctic, they're kind of stranded on these islands, and anything that comes to those islands, sort of whales or seals that is washed up, that's what they would eat. But along the Hudson Bay, there's vast amounts of land where they can forage for, amongst the wildflowers for mice. They can hunt caribou, eat fish, stuff like that. But for the most part, when the Arctic is frozen, this is kind of what it looks like. It's a vast maze of ocean and ice, as you can see in this picture. I would like to task anyone here to find me a seal on this picture. So as you can imagine, for a polar bear, this would be rather difficult to find something about that size. But that's kind of what they do from basically November to July. They're looking for seals on the ice. And for the most part, along the Hudson Bay, they are very healthy, eating these seals, but also feeding on beluga whales, which are left behind by Inuit hunters. Now, I apologize, this is rather a gruesome picture, but it is a huge part of why the polar bears in the Arctic are so healthy. It is because Inuit hunters leave behind leftovers from narwhal, from beluga whales, from bowhead whales, and all these bears come in to feed on them in the summertime when otherwise they would not be eating anything at all.
Martin, are you showing us the right screen?
Sorry?
Are you showing us the right screen? We're seeing a PDF screen that says reopen closed PDFs.
Oh, I'm okay. Sorry. Let me try again. Because it was showing up on my screen.
This looks better. Actually, it looks a little gruesome, so it's probably what you meant.
Yeah, that's why I was talking about a picture. Hold on, let me see if this is this working?
We can see the whale plus a bear on an ice floe, 2 pictures.
Okay, you see 2 pictures. Okay, interesting. I see one. Okay, I apologize. Technology is sometimes an enemy. It was working when Jim and I tried this a few days ago.
We're seeing 2 pictures.
Okay, so I'll have to do it 2 pictures at a time because the full screen function, I don't think it's working right now. Sorry about that. Okay, so here's the picture of the beluga whale I mentioned. That is why everyone's seeing it okay?
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, perfect. So this is why our bears in Canada are so healthy, and it's unfortunate, but it is sort of the way of life up north. By any case, as you see by the other picture of the polar bear on the ice floe, as soon as the ice starts to melt around July, all the polar bears start to sort of migrate to land at around the same time that all the other wildlife is coming up to the Arctic. Arctic terns, foxes, huge amounts of beluga whales. All of these animals are timing their migration Even the snowy owls I mentioned in my last presentation have timed it perfectly to arrive just when the sea ice is melting. For the most part, the ice and the snow on land have already melted. So by the time polar bears come to shore, terns, geese, snowy owls, all of the bird life have already made their nests. The pictures here were actually taken while we were waiting for the polar bears, because the ice is unpredictable. And last year, it just so happened that we were expecting it to melt at the start of July, and it didn't melt until the end of July, which good for the bears, less good for us because we had to sort of find other ways and other things to photograph. But in any case, eventually the ice melted, and the beluga whales, as you see in this picture, started making their way into the estuaries of the Hudson Bay, and the polar bears started making their way off of the ice, swimming across the Arctic Ocean to land.
Do the polar bears actually kill the belugas, or do they scavenge?
Yeah, they will hunt the beluga whale. So in the wintertime, they will go to, they're called polynyas. It's a large amount of water that's left unfrozen year round. The whales and the birds, all of the wildlife go there, and so do the polar bears, and they try to grab them when they surface on the breathing holes. In the summertime, mostly they will not eat beluga because they're really hard to catch. But they will wait for them in the tide line, because what the belugas do is they come to shore and rub themselves on the rocks in the river estuaries. As the tide goes out, sometimes the less experienced whales wait a little bit too long and they get stranded, and there's always a bear waiting. Usually a whale that is sort of left out of the water will not go unnoticed for more than half an hour. There's usually a polar bear somewhere. In any case, the polar bears start making their way from the sea ice to shore. And we are lucky enough to document that using some kind of specialized gear as the bears sort of made their way from the ice. In the picture here, you can kind of make out a little, I don't know how big it is on your guys' screen, but you can kind of maybe make out a little bit of white on the horizon, and that's the sea ice that these bears just left behind. Of course, the other picture is the picture that was featured in Canadian Geographic, and that is the polar bear and the grizzly bear, which I'll talk a little bit about it because it is the first time that has ever been documented. In Churchill, sort of further inland, they do have areas where they have documented a grizzly bear, a polar bear, and a black bear on a trail camera. But it is unheard of to actually see them interact and to see them hunt. Back to the question that came up earlier, you can see here, this is kind of the tide line. The polar bear is sitting on a rock. That's his hunting rock. So what happens is they would wait for a beluga whale to sort of swim by, and when it's close enough, the polar bear would jump on it. Our speculation is that the grizzly bear, having woken up earlier and having come to shore earlier than the polar bears, have sort of made their way to this area, and when the ice melted and the polar bears arrived, the grizzly bears just stuck around and trying to make the most of the polar bear's catch, which in this case is beluga whale. So this was sort of mid-July, and the polar bears slowly started to show up, and we began what would be a 2-week camping trip with these polar bears on a sort of remote island in the Hudson Bay, where we took a little boat and we parked it on shore, and that was our home. We didn't have much food. We had what we brought, which was a lot of Mr. Noodles and other canned goods. I did lose 10 pounds. But yeah, we camped there. You can kind of make it out in this picture. That's our camp, that's our boat. the front served as our eating area, cooking area. In the back, we had 3 bunk beds, sort of way in the back, and that was completely shut off from the polar bears, as a few times we actually did have them climb into this area. And the windows on that little camp were kind of born from the fact that a polar bear ate their way into our camp and made a little window, and we wanted to sort of make the most of it, and we sort of patched it up and made actual windows. But we did all of that while we were sort of bored waiting for the bears to show up as they would come and go.
Well, weren't you concerned that the bears would attack you?
They wouldn't. They never attacked. They I'll get into it a little bit later as we sort of get into the individual bears. They would never attack us. They were more curious, if anything. Whenever they came close to camp, we were usually making breakfast or eating lunch. The one morning was when the bear did come into camp was sort of unforeseen circumstances, where we got up at 4 a.m. to shoot a sunrise, and we forgot to turn the alarms back on, which were sort of on the outer perimeter of the camp, and the bears snuck up on us, and I woke up and there was kind of a bear staring at me through the window, but it wasn't that dangerous. We just climbed up on the roof, made some sounds, the bear ran away. In any case, this was our camp, and those were the mosquitoes we were dealing with every single day. Being covered in them, head to toe. The mosquitoes were not that bad. Sandflies were awful because they would dig through everything we had on us. But at the end of the day, it was worth it for these guys. So of the 27 bears, we named all of them. This here is Wanda. Wanda was the biggest polar bear I have ever seen in my life. She was huge. Our assumption is she was a pregnant female who might have cubs this year. But in any case, she stuck around with us for almost the entire 2 weeks. She would walk around. She would come visit us at camp. The picture of her in the water was actually taken from the roof of that boat you saw earlier. While the one of her lying down was sort of taken across from our camp. And that was typical Wanda. She would lie on the ground, lie in the wildflowers, and just roll around. We actually saw another bear. I'll get to her in a second. We saw another bear sort of come to Wanda and attack her. And instead of running away or being angry, she kind of just stood there and stared at the other bear, and eventually she kind of walked off. Like, there was not kind of the conflict you would see from other bears. But in any case, that was Wanda. This is on the left here, covered in bugs. That's Slim Jim. We eventually made backstories for all of these bears. Like in the picture I showed earlier with Wanda lying on the ground on her back. These bears, you spend so much time with them every single day, and you have a lot of time to sort of think about their story. So once we came up with names, and once we took all of our pictures, we would sort of come up with backstories of where these bears came from and who's seeing who and who's angry with whoever. So it was an interesting experience, and I wish you could all be there to experience it, because it was you didn't think of these animals as predators that could at any moment kill you because they're polar bears, but you thought of them as friends, and you sort of built this relationship with them. And likewise, they built a relationship with us. So here in this other picture, when I talked about the polar bear that ran at Wanda, and the polar bear that actually came into our camp, that was Athena and Hercules on the left here, which is the mom and 2-year-old cub. This was unique because, and you can't really tell in the picture, but the cub only had 3 legs. our assumption is that it was taken by wolves, because what these bears do is, like I mentioned earlier, they sort of come to land, and the mom and cubs, they tend to go deeper inland, just because there is less predators, because the males sort of stay on the shore. But as soon as they cross that line, wolves sort of patrol the entire coastline. Our assumption is that a wolf was sort of nipping at their ankles and grabbed the poor cub here and got its leg. Lucky for the cub, was very much alive and very much in good spirits. It seems to have been dealing with this disability for quite some time, because you could tell based on what it was doing. Usually cubs would sort of run around, they would be close to mom, they would like to walk. This cub, on the other hand, loved to swim. Polar bears, what they do, they use their front paws as the propulsion, and their hind legs only as the rudder. So in the water, having 3 legs is not that bad, as long as it's the hind leg, because you would usually use the front ones to power and the back ones would only stir. And in such case, this guy was well prepared for it, and he was having we loved him. He was very loud, but he was very much in good spirits despite his disability. While on the right, you will see 2 first-year cubs. I believe that is Bam Bam and Pebbles. We saw 6 different mums and cubs, so it's a little bit, the names get a little bit mixed up in my mind, but these guys were awesome. They were our main, you can see them here again. They were our main attraction. They sort of, one day when we were camped, we had the big boat that you saw, and then we had a little small camp sort of further inland, and we saw them sort of walking up the coastline one day, and we really wanted them to come to our spot, because we wanted cubs and wildflowers. As you can see in this picture, that's just something that is unheard of and adorable. And that's what we wanted. And we saw them kind of walk by, but we thought they would be too scared of us. At the end of the day, we are people. Polar bears do tend to fear people. But they kind of walked by, came to our camp, and they stayed. They stayed for about a week. They grew to, we developed some sort of crazy bond with this mom and cubs, where she did not look at us as enemies, she did not look at us as food, but we were almost an alliance. What happened with our camp was larger males were very much scared of our presence or aware of our presence, while baby bears and mums and other females tend to conjugate around us, because they knew that the males were leaving us alone. So they sort of thought of our camp as kind of the safe zone. So outside of the younger males, most of the pictures you see here are females and cubs, or just big females. But back to this family here, they shared some very intimate moments with us. I mean, as you can see here, the mom was nursing her cubs. That was no more than 35 feet away from me. And the cub you see in the wildflowers, that was, we set up our camp, and mom was sort of a little bit further inland, and she decided she wanted to go for a swim. So she brought her cubs, she left her cubs at our campsite, and she left. We didn't quite understand what was happening, but we can only imagine that she felt safe with us, and she wanted to leave the cubs there because she knew nothing would happen to them. But it was a very intimate moment, and somewhat magical for a polar bear to not fear you in such a way that they actually leave her cubs, and the cubs are playing right in front of you. You know, this picture here, at one point the bears were maybe 10 feet away. We were at our camp. At all times we were careful, but it was quite something. Moving on here, as you saw in that video I showed earlier, and once I finish the presentation, I can finish the video for you. We were using drones for the most part to take pictures and videos. It was the best way to get around. It was more of a luxury, if anything. But again, it's something that is reserved for those that know how to use it. Like in such case, we conditioned the bears to the drone. You know, we didn't rush them with the machine. We didn't sort of force them. It took, again, this whole project took weeks, and it was building this trust with the polar bears. So first 4 days, we didn't use the drone at all. We were sort of just observing their behavior, seeing what these bears do, and eventually we conditioned them to the point where we would get the drone and we used it to capture some footage which has actually never really been seen before, especially with a drone, because usually animals run from them or are scared of them. This was not the case whatsoever. When we were not using the drones, the bears were giving us quite the show, as you can see on the picture on the right. This was a very typical occurrence, watching bears sort of roll around on their backs and scratch and sleep and just being lazy bears. But it was, again, it was one bear that tended to do it all, and that was Wanda, and again, that's her right there. Moving on here, it was, as I mentioned earlier, with our polar bears in the Arctic being so healthy, it was interesting being with them for 2 weeks, because you got to see behaviors many times which has not really been documented, especially in the summertime. Most of the stories of polar bears that we hear are polar bears in the wintertime, in the snow, and usually the stories we hear about the summer are polar bears starving. As much as we did see skinny bears, they were not skinny due to any other reason, but they were third-year cubs, which means their mom just left them and they were starting to learn how to hunt and forage and whatnot. But for the most part, the bears were really healthy. Even here on the left, you can see. So this bear was actually, it was interesting to watch. He was hunting for mice, and it was funny. He wasn't even hunting for them as much as playing with them. What he would do is he would walk around and he would see something or hear something in the bushes, and he would sort of pounce as you would see a fox or even a polar bear in the wintertime do. But it was quite funny to see, and quite interesting, because it was just joyful. And then on the left is, or sorry, on the right is a polar bear just hanging out in the wildflowers. We had a few remote control cameras set up around the island that were documenting the bears. One thing I've learned, though, is what works for you at home does not work for you in the Arctic. So I had this amazing setup that I was going to bring up north to document these bears, and I brought it all out. And the first thing a bear did was slap it, and that was the end of that. So I, on day one, was left with no camera traps to document the bears. So what I ended up doing was I ended up taking my underwater housing, putting it on a tripod, hammering it into the ground so no bear could take it. And I did not have any lasers or any switches. I had to stand there with a little pocket wizard that I use in my photo studio and fire it off from the distance was around 25 feet away. So all of the pictures you see with a wide angle lens, if they were not taken with a drone, they were not taken in some luxury where I was lying in bed and my camera was snapping away some pictures. They were taken while I was either on the roof or on some random rock with my hand up, holding this switch to try and get the best signal, pressing the trigger. So, yeah, but at the end of the day, the the drone was one of the best ways to document the bears. This one on the left here. It was just a very simple way to get around our space. We did have 27 different bears. At any point in time, there were up to 7 around our campsite, just hanging out. They were by no means there because of us. They were more because it was safe, and just because around the Hudson Bay, there are just that many bears in a certain area. And sometimes we couldn't even leave camp. So what we did was we just took off with the drone and scouted different parts of our area, capturing footage like this. What we did was we built a relationship with these bears, as I mentioned earlier. In this picture on the left, that was a new mom and cub, or on the right, sorry. That was a new mom and cub that showed up one morning, and they were very cautious and they didn't know us. And you can see by their pose, they were kind of on edge because they had no idea who we were. And all the other bears did, but these guys kind of just showed up. They saw people and they said, oh, you know, last time I saw a person, I ended up being shot, and somebody put a sticker on my ear, and I ended up getting carried away on the sea ice. So such was the case here. These bears kind of were very cautious of us, but through time we ended up bonding with them, and eventually they trusted us as much as the other mom and cubs. Here, when I say this, sorry, this was when I talked about the boat. This was the back area where we were camping. At the end of the day, it wasn't a camp, it was a boat that we drove into this area. But this is sort of what we would wake up to every morning, every night. As much as I wasn't eating very well, I also wasn't sleeping, because we would go to bed around midnight, 1 o'clock, watching the auroras, and we would get maybe about an hour or 2 of sleep before we could hear our alarms going off saying there's a polar bear in the area. So we just had to get out of bed, go on the roof, make some noise, scare them off, and everything ended up being fine. And we would wake up at 4 in the morning, start our day. So only about 3 or 4 hours of sleep, interrupted, I should say, every night. But these bears, they were curious. They weren't there to sort of attack us or eat us. They were there to see what we were up to and what our boat was, especially at low tide. As you can see here, where that bear is, that would usually be underwater. And the tide, like at low tide, our entire boat was on shore. That's why we couldn't even have sort of lasers or anything, electric fences or anything like that. Because what would happen is, as soon as the low tide comes, the bears would just go on the inside of the electric fence. And we didn't want the tide to go up and have a polar bear stuck angry at this point in our little area. So we just had 2 alarms sort of beeping whenever something would trigger them. It was fine. The last 2 days, as you can see in these pictures, were extremely foggy, and the alarms would just set off at any point in time. So we ended up turning them off, and one of us ended up being on the roof all night. That was me. Watching for bears and making sure none of them go inside our camp. And here it is. That's what we would end up watching at midnight or 1 o'clock in July of all times. The auroras were spectacular in this area. There's no light pollution outside of the sun. And it was just amazing to see every night after having such a crazy day with these polar bears. You would kind of sit down on the roof, debrief. We filmed little videos, like little behind the scenes videos, where we sort of debriefed every single day for the 2 weeks. I'll eventually post them. I'm just waiting till I get a little closer to my trip this year, and I'll post them, and I can send you all a link so you can have a look, because it's amazing to see this escalation of first day. We were all super excited to see the bears. Everyone was thrilled. Everyone looked normal. By the end of it, our bear guard, who has never seen a polar bear up until the point where he went with us, he wanted to see a polar bear. He loved seeing bears. And in the last video we have, he goes in front of the camera and we ask him, hey, like, well, how was the trip? And he says, if I see a, jokingly, I should say, he says, if I see another polar bear, I'll shoot it. And he was so angry because he wasn't sleeping, he wasn't eating. These polar bears, as much as we love them, they were incredibly annoying. And we just saw so many of them that was the case. So that was a very interesting escalation of our 2 weeks with the bears, from being super excited to looking like just completely rugged, beard, long hair. We could only shower in the ocean, which was 2 degrees. So it was an interesting time. But in any case, that's sort of the polar bear story. But I'd love to answer any questions and talk more about it.
How many people were in your?
Yeah, there was 3 of us. So it was myself. I was asked to lead it and to be the main photographer, videographer. I took with me an assistant because I wanted someone to film these behind the scenes videos and sort of capture what I was missing, and a bear guard. And that was the 3 of us. Sometimes, like maybe once or twice a week, we had the owner of the lodge that I went up with come visit. He brought us sandwiches, which was the best part of his visit. But yeah, there wasn't many.
Whom were you working for?
This was a joint. I wasn't working for anyone necessarily. It was kind of a joint cooperation with a lodge up in Churchill called Lazy Bear Expeditions. I've been working with them for quite some time, taking their pictures and doing their videography. And their owner approached me last year in April, and he said, "Martin, you know, I know you've been wanting to document polar bears in fireweed. I have no tourists. If you come up, I can give you a boat and you can go wherever you want." So mid-pandemic, I said, absolutely, let's I would love to, and that's what happened. I planned it with him, and we built the camp while I was there, and we took it out, and this is what it ended up being. And I'm going back again this year to see if I can get some better pictures of the polar bear with the grizzly bear, as well as to document the polar bears in the wildflowers, because unfortunately the wildflowers bloomed about 5 days after I left, just because everything was so delayed last year. Same with the ice, the flowers, everything was late, and I had to go back to Vancouver because I work in film and I had work, so every day I had my dad call me on the satellite phone being like, "Did the flowers bloom? You have to come home." But yeah.
Martin, there was a flag on, I think, on the boat. Whose flag was that?
That was a Dutch flag. Our bear guard was Dutch, and none of us brought any flags. So the first thing he did was erect a flagpole and put his flag up. And the second thing that happened was I have a picture of a bear walking up to the flagpole and looking up at the flag. So it was funny to see, but yeah.
Did any of the grizzlies approach you guys?
No, the grizzly bears, especially in the Arctic, are very scared of people. They are not very, here in BC, we protect them. In the Arctic, no one does. They are considered pests that are coming to the Arctic because of the changing climates. So as soon as they see people, usually the person would shoot it. So as soon as the bear saw us, it ran off. I hope to sort of change that relationship slightly this summer. Now that I know where that polar bear is, which is a different place where we end up camping, I want to set up camp where that grizzly bear usually is and see if over time we can sort of build a relationship and show it that we're not out there to hurt it, and maybe get some closer shots.
Does anyone else have more questions?
I have a question. What did you say, Martin, about there being no pollution there, where that shot where you took the aurora?
Yeah, like light pollution, because we're in such a remote area. Like the closest community we are to is Churchill, Manitoba, and that's about an hour boat ride away. The next one would be Arviat and Nunavut, and all of those are small communities. They're not, Churchill doesn't have that many people, so you're not getting a lot of light. The biggest city being Winnipeg, down south. So it was as remote as an area gets, in terms of all aspects. All we had was a satellite phone. Every day we would send a text message saying we're okay, but even the radio, we tried to call Iqaluit on the marine radio just to tell them we're located here, just if anyone's looking for us, if you hear any distress signals or anything like that, this is where we are, and we couldn't even reach them. And those are meant to actually travel long distances, and they weren't able to reach anybody. So
what were the stars like at night then?
Stars are amazing. It would be more amazing in the wintertime. Like, the sun never really did go down. What you see here is probably the peak of night. The sun would sort of go down, and it would get about this dark, and then it would rise up again. So it wasn't like full 24-hour daylight, but it was by no means nighttime. You could definitely see and make things out right at midnight.
So Martin, does the aurora make a sound? I've heard that that they do, that you hear them.
Not in my experience, but in my experience, the more sound you make, the better the aurora is. All the times I've seen aurora, and it's up north, it's kind of the tradition, long-lasting tradition through Inuit knowledge and First Nations. It's the spirits, and if you talk to them, and if you sing, and if you dance, it sort of encourages them to come out. And I've tried multiple times, and it is true, the louder you are, you can watch them sort of dance above your head.
That's very interesting.
Are the polar bears protected?
Sorry?
Are the polar bears protected?
Not in protected by government, or protective of their young.
By the limited hunting or whatever.
Not in Canada. In Canada, we're allowed to hunt polar bears, both for trophies and for food. It is unfortunate, and I am not at all for it. It was recently came out, there was an article in the north where they had, I believe, 800 polar bear skins that could not be sold. So, and that was collected, I forget over how long, but what the Inuits do is some of them hunt them for tradition, and I'm all for that, because they use them for their clothing, they use the meat, they share it within their community. But others hunt them because it's a source of income, and they would take the skins, they sell them to the government, and then the government sells them. And in this case, the government had 800 polar bear skins. And I'm sorry, that number might be off, so don't quote me on it, but it was a lot of polar bears, and they couldn't sell them because they were too small, they were too old, they just didn't fit the criteria, so they had to ship them back to Nunavut, so the community can do something with them.
I hear polar bear liver is dangerous to eat.
They would contain a lot of, just because in general the whales contain a lot of pollutants already. It would not be the best, but apparently polar bear meat just tastes like seal. I have not tasted it myself, nor after spending 27 days, or sorry, spending 2 weeks with them would I want to, because that's sort of a relationship that I'd feel like I'm eating a best friend. But yeah, in Canada, you're allowed to hunt them, and it's one of the only places where that's allowed.
Thanks.
Martin, you mentioned at the beginning that the bears were well fed because they were eating the carcasses of whales and other animals that had been hunted. What's that about?
Yeah, so the Inuits, they hunt the whales, they hunt the beluga whales, they hunt the narwhal, and they only take the fat. It's called muktuk in Inuktitut. It's the fat of the whale, and they leave all the meat behind. It's I don't necessarily know why. It might be to do with pollutants. I've tasted it before. It's not that depends how you cook it. It's not that great either. So they leave all of that behind, and as soon as they do, all of these bears, they come and they feast on it, which is I would understand why that is one of the reasons why the polar bears in the Hudson Bay, and especially in the Canadian Arctic, especially around the communities, are so well off and are actually healthy, is because the cycle of a polar bear is in November, depending on when the sea ice forms, usually mid-November, but sometimes mid-December, the polar bears go out on the ice. They hunt all season long on the sea ice, and then they usually come back to shore around July. Depends again where in the Arctic, July, August, sometimes June, and they come to shore, and usually they wouldn't eat. Like in Norway and Svalbard and other parts of the Arctic, they don't eat. They have nothing to eat because they need the ice to hunt for seals. And so they usually starve themselves for a few months. And as you can imagine, for such a big animal, that's they get quite skinny come November. But here, just because they have access to so much food, even if it's not something that's been hunted, they can really sort of keep up that metabolism. And come November, when the ice forms, they haven't not been eating for 4 or 5 months. They've actually been eating that whole time. So they eat year round.
Do they not hibernate?
No, polar bears don't hibernate. What happens is the females hibernate, but only when they have cubs. So male bears go year round. And females, usually, if she's pregnant, she goes into hibernation at the start of winter. So around November, she builds a den in the snow. She has her cubs in there. They are born around February, and she takes them out in March. And as soon as she takes them out on the sea ice to around end of March, April, May, to make the most of that sea ice. And sometimes in parts of the Arctic, especially in Norway and other parts, not in Canada necessarily, when she takes them out in April, May, the ice is already melting and it's too dangerous for them to go. So then at that point, she will have gone a year without eating, especially in those places. Because if she goes to den in November, she's not going to see ice until November. So it's that's sort of what's threatening polar bears in other parts of the world. And that's why seeing polar bears with more cubs means that there's a healthy population. Like we saw generally two. Sometimes we saw 3, which is unheard of now. It used to be apparently very common. 3 polar bears used to be a normal, but now it's sort of a rarity. Even though it is seen 3 and sometimes even 4, but 3.
Annie Caps, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, there was a picture of the polar bear and the grizzly, and the grizzly looked very tiny. What are their relative weights or size?
I couldn't give you the weight, but a polar bear is made. There's different types of grizzlies. We have like the grizzly bear you would see in British Columbia and Alaska isn't the one you would see up in the prairies. They're smaller. They're a little bit more. Here, I can bring up the picture here. The polar bears are a little bit more. I would say dense. Like they're shorter in the body. They're shorter in the legs. They're a bit more rugged. Such being the case, I would say they're about a half of a polar bear. In general, a polar bear is already the largest bear species. But compared to especially an Arctic grizzly bear, they're Arctic grizzly bears would not be that big. And I think that grizzly bear was not an adult either. I think that was not a cub, but a younger bear for sure.
Kodiak bear, is that a form of grizzly?
Yeah, it's a species found in Alaska. They're the largest grizzly bear species. It's like subspecies. And you find them especially in Kodiak, Alaska, and they're so big because they have that, all the salmon, especially on our west coast, to maintain that that sort of body type.
So Martin,
You have a question?
I have a question.
I have a question. Yes. Martin, you said that the Inuit ate the fat of the whales and then the polar bears lived off the meat. Don't the polar bears also need that fat that they would have off the whale?
The polar bears, they do, and I'll bring up that that picture here with the whale. What you see there, that for the most part, that's still fat on the backside. It's already red meat, and that's what they would leave behind. The bears do need that, but the meat itself is also very rich, and you have to take to consider what are the alternatives here. You know, the bear not eating at all or eating the meat, that meat is going to sustain it, especially a beluga whale of that size. If it's only one bear eating it, which usually it isn't, but it's around 5 maybe. But the first one there, they get quite a lot of that meat, and it's still quite a lot of nutrition and fat that they can harvest off of that.
They also eat the organs?
Yeah, they'll eat the bones. They'll eat everything. This whale you see here, we watched. We left it on shore, and it was gone within 2 days, and it was gone. Like there was, we never found the skull. We found a few teeth. We found 5 vertebrae, and that was all we found of the beluga.
Wow.
Elizabeth, you had a question.
Yes, I did. Yeah. I wanted to know why you took so little food with you, and will you do that again the next time? Was it a weight problem with the plane or something?
No, we were a little bit underprepared, I will admit. We also didn't know what to expect. Something like this has never been done before. It has been in the wintertime when the bears are well fed. But for someone to go out in the summertime and camp with polar bears, that's unheard of.
Yeah.
So we just didn't know, we didn't want to bring, meats and steaks and all of this stuff because you didn't know what the bears would be attracted to. And that being said, also everything goes bad. You don't have a means of storing anything. You can't store it in the ocean because that's like ringing a dinner bell. For the bears, so you can't really store anything. So even the sandwiches we brought, when the owner would come, he would bring a box of sandwiches, and we said, why are you bringing a box of sandwiches? There's no way we're going to eat all of these because they go bad within 2 or 3 days out there, especially in that kind of environment, because it's a very humid environment. It's very warm in the summertime. On the hottest day, it was 20 degrees. It's warm.
Yeah, of course, that's true. I was forgetting that it was summertime and you don't exactly have a refrigerator with you.
Yeah.
So you're planning on going back again in the summer.
Yeah.
Have you been able to figure out some way to take food that's not going to, it's going to keep you from losing 10 pounds and maybe not attract a whole bunch of predators?
Yeah, I think we're still trying to figure it out completely, but the idea is to bring a lot more packed foods, hopefully more of a variety, because we ate so much Mr. Noodles that we probably never want to see that ever again. But yeah, a lot more canned goods, and at Mountain Equipment you can buy like dehydrated foods. So hopefully we'll bring a lot more of those as well.
Where did you?
All you need is survival packages.
Yeah, maybe we'll get one of them to drop off a whale or something.
Anybody have any more questions?
But
Oh.
comment, it's fascinating to hear that tale, Martin.
I'm glad
Good on you. Thank you.
I'm very glad you all enjoyed it, and thank you for inviting me back. I will say that as a courtesy to all of you, I will be doing 20% off all of our prints of the polar bears on our website, just for you guys. If any of you are interested, I can I'll send an email with the info, so you guys can have a look at that if you're interested.
Are you going to show us the movie again or part of it?
Yes, if everyone wants, I can play the ending.
Yep, please do.
Is that full screen for everybody?
Yes.
That looks good.
Okay, perfect.
Good.
So just before I play it, this was again one of those moments that was sort of unheard of. This is 3 female bears. 2 of these female bears, you saw them earlier in this clip. They were playing in the water. They were, I don't know if they were sisters or acquaintances, but they never left each other's side. So as you hear those stories in Africa of cheetahs organizing together to hunt, we assume that this was polar bears organizing to hunt in numbers, which was extremely unique. So this is her in the front. That's Betty. Behind her is way back there is Wanda, that big bear I mentioned, and this one in the middle was Veronica. Sorry, I know they all have names now. So, anyways.
That was pretty special, Martin.
Yeah, I mean, I think you see in those clips more than in the photographs that all the bears sort of have a personality and some sort of story, which is why we sort of came up with names and even backstories. Like I mentioned earlier, it was too fitting not to. It was we kind of owed it to them to sort of say, this is you, and you are your own person or your own bear, and you have some sort of story. And it was quite cool seeing that. I mean, you saw that that one bear trying to fall asleep, kind of coming back. Like, how many times have I done that on the couch?
I seem to have lost my chat thing here, but there were, Joe Stevenson said it was a great presentation. Annie Caps wanted to know if the polar bears vocalize.
They do. Not so much that you can hear amongst the adults, but the cub with the 3 legs, he was very vocal. You could hear him coming before you saw him. He was just all sorts of weird sounds. Kind of sounded like I'm trying to figure out something to compare it to, but it has a very distinctive smell, almost, sound, almost like a bark, but kind of deeper, like a growl. But yeah, the adults not so much. Mostly through smells and touches they communicate. But I can imagine that they also like we heard them growl at each other a few times.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be growling.
Yeah.
But the mother bears didn't, like they communicated with their cubs just by touch and vice versa.
Yeah, and you could when they nursed, it was a very interesting sound. It was almost like a cat purring, but sort of like a helicopter hum. It was. I tried to take a video, but I couldn't. They were too far away for that. But it was an amazing sound if you just sort of sat there and listened to them. It was hard to stop clicking with the camera, but when it was calm and peaceful, it was a very beautiful sound. It was quite amazing.
Yeah. A few more comments and a couple of questions here. Hadis Levy said, a great experience in photos and video. Thank you for sharing. Joel, we did get already. Armin wanted to know if they're great shots. How far were you from the drone?
They were, depending on when, sometimes, usually around 15 feet between the drone and the polar bear. Sometimes less. That polar bear shot you saw of the sunset and the polar bear lying down, I would say maybe that was between 10 and 15 feet where the drone was hovering, maybe about a few inches off of the ground. And again, we were using a very small drone, and it took time and a lot of sort of preparation. I've been working with these bears for, like, this wasn't sort of a one-time trip to the Arctic. I've been going up since 2015 and sort of been perfecting this technique of how to shoot them with the drone. So it was a lot of sort of backstories, but eventually we managed to get them. The males you'd have to stay further away, but the females, especially with the cubs, they were a very welcoming.
How far away were you from the drone?
I was around 500 meters sometimes.
Wow.
We use the drone, especially in situations like that, when there was a nice sunset or there was a rainbow, when we were just too tired to walk anywhere. When my bear guard was too tired to go anywhere, I would just tell him, have a nap, stay inside. I'm going to go on the roof. I'm going to fly the drone.
So Audrey wanted to know, how do you tell which are female other than when they have cubs?
It's difficult to tell. You could tell when they roll over, for the most part. Sometimes it's really hard. Like, for instance, Wanda, the big fat female we saw, for the longest period of time, we thought it was a male, just because you don't see females that big in general. Just they tend to be smaller. They tend to behave a little differently. But we were surprised to find out she was a female. Looks aside, you could kind of tell even by how they act. Males are a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more quick. Like they would sort of be a little bit more on edge and a little bit more aware. The females kind of were a little bit more laid back, kind of a little bit more welcoming. The males had to know everything that was going on, and they knew we were there a long time before we knew they were there.
And Grant Edwards wanted to know if you brought all your drinking water with you, or was there a source nearby?
No, we brought all our drinking water. We washed ourselves and the dishes in the ocean. There was a lake in a little bit, maybe about 100 meters away from our camp, but it was possibly even salt water in that lake as well, because it's on sea level. But we brought everything in, and the owner, when he came, he would bring back water with him, because we went through it pretty quick.
I can imagine.
Especially if you're not sleeping.
So, anybody else with more questions, comments? We're done.
Keep your drones charged. What do you do for power? You have solar energy?
We had solar panels, but we sort of went into this not knowing what anything would be like. So we went and sorry, I just read the comment with the bathroom. That's a really funny story. No, we would have a generator going, but first we had the solar panels because we didn't know how the bears would react to the sounds we were making. We thought that we would show up and the bears would run away. And we showed up and the bears did not run away. They were more curious about us. So we would have the generator going, and when we saw new bears coming in, we would turn it off thinking it would scare them off. Eventually, we just by accident left it on, and the bears didn't care less, so we just decided we're going to leave it on whenever we want to. It was more for our comfort. We would turn it off because it's loud. So we ended up taking it off the boat, buried it in a bunch of rocks and whatnot, and carried cables to the boat, and it was a whole thing. But
Oh, here's Molly, Val Fuller, asking, where did you go to the bathroom?
Yeah, that was a funny one. So we brought a bucket, but we decided, we had a meeting, that it was stupid of us to use this bucket because in bear country, it would take you longer to clean the bucket than to do anything. So we went behind rocks in the tide line, just because we didn't want the bears to get at it. So we would, when it was low tide, we would just find a nice rock and go there, which was funny in the sense that there was always bears around. And when you have to go, you have to go. So my buddy one time really needed to go, and there was 5 bears around camp. And he was just like, I can't hold it. So we kind of just stood there with a gun, and he kind of went behind a rock, and we were kind of just watching for all these bears, like seeing if anyone's moving, and jokingly we would tell him one's coming and he would run away, and then like, no, just kidding. But and also the terns, because like I saw like the 2 pictures I showed earlier of them on their nests. We were right in a tern colony. And they weren't inside, they were really right on the shoreline, but they would attack you, especially the first few days. They eventually got used to us being there, so they stopped attacking us, but for the most part they were very aggressive with us being there. Especially we were kind of on the left side of this island, and there was a huge colony kind of on the right, closer to mainland. But yeah, they did not, at first they did not like us at all, and when you wanted to use the washroom, they were not cooperative at all.
Do you ever have to fire the rifle to scare the bears?
No, I fired it off once when we had our boat and then we had a separate camp set up inland. I fired it once to scare the bear because it was eating the tire. But the thing with a gunshot, it sounds almost like a piece of ice smashing into each other. And that's what the bears hear all winter. You know, they're out on the sea ice, so they hear icebergs, sea ice smashing into each other. So a gunshot is not the way to go. So that did not work at all. I fired it right next to the bear, and the bear did not move at all. What worked, we had to use bear spray once. That worked. But it was not until the second time we fired it at the bear that it worked. And rocks worked. It was the simplest things. Having a rock with you was probably your best weapon to have. Like, we were on top of camp and we tried to scare some bears, and we tried everything. We tried the air horns, sirens, everything. Nothing worked. We threw a rock on the ground, the bear ran away.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, so when you see that, there's a BBC documentary where there's the making of, and the BBC crew is out there, and their guide carries a stick against the polar bears, and he says, you know, I point the stick at the bear and the bear stays away. It's you would think that's not going to work, but that works a lot better than anything else.
Wow. That's quite incredible. Well, that was quite an incredible presentation, quite an incredible experience. I won't ask to join you when you go again. Not quite my thing. But, so were there other animals there besides the polar bears? Wolves?
We didn't see wolves. We saw caribou. We saw, of course, belugas, seals, terns, Arctic 6.6, and I want to say that's everything. In the area where we were, there aren't many wolves, but they are further inland, of course. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Narwhal also don't really go where we were. There was a pod of orcas that we heard because I have friends in Arctic communities further north, so they messaged me on the satellite phone saying there's a pod of killer whales coming your way, but we never did see them.
That's too bad. Yeah. Well, that was absolutely fantastic, Martin. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Outstanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
I'll send your poster and your check.
No worries. I'll send you. I'll send an email out with the website information, the promo code, so you guys have it.
Yeah. Okay. Send it. You can send it to me or to Jim. One of the
Awesome.
other.
Yeah. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks again. See you later.
Bye.
Outstanding. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And next month we have a slightly different kind of presentation, much closer to home, much calmer. Rain gardens and how they can help keep streams clean and clear for fish. Deborah Jones.
Those polar bears are going to be a hard act to follow. They were so amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing, but keeping our streams clean and clear for fish is pretty darn important too. And if you can do that with rain gardens, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, this is closer to home.
Definitely. Thanks, Deb.
Thank you.
Are they going to be able to keep the herons out of the gardens, of the water?
Oh, yes, I saw the article about the herons. Let me see. How do I get my video on here?
They love to feed on the fish in these ponds.
Yeah, right. But the article about that, can you hear me and see me now?
Yep.
Yeah. The article about that did say the researcher thought it wasn't necessarily a bad thing because the herons may be taking fry that would be competing with other fry for food and that maybe aren't the fittest fry anyway. So in other words, nature's way of thinning out the population of salmon fry. We also have quite a few mallards who've discovered Lower Cougar Creek, and which is where most of the fry hatch. And also there were, up until they hatched a month, 3 weeks ago, there were a lot of eggs in the substrate of the stream. and the mallards may have been eating eggs as well. So, but I don't know, we're kind of like, build the habitat.